Thanks. I'll give people maybe 30 seconds to sit down. My name is TRAYNOR from Intercom, and I will be talking about how to manage product strategy in a startup. So just to give you a very brief background, the groundings for a lot of the lessons I'll talk about today actually come from Intercom itself. Intercom is a startup that I started back in 2011. And we started off with 4 founders and no customers and no money, and today we have over 6,000 customers, 120 people, and I guess $30 million or something like that in funding. And I say that only to make the point that we didn't make this up. This is kind of the principles we've applied along the way that have helped us keep the product in some way focused. So there's really 4 key points I'm going to cover today, and hopefully we'll have time for questions afterwards. I'll be around either way. The most important thing, and it sounds quite fluffy, so I'll get quite specific in a second, but is to start, a focused product comes from a focused vision, an idea of what it is that you actually want to create. I really like this page in Alice in Wonderland, where she bumps into a character called the Cheshire Cat, and he's sitting at a crossroads, and she says, well, which road do I take? And he says, well, where are you going? And she says, I don't know. And he says, well, in that case, it doesn't matter, does it? The reason I like that is because it's kind of the very guiding truth of your product is that if you don't really know what it is you're trying to do, all features look good, all ideas look good, all strategies sound feasible. So without a vision, what you'll do is you'll flip-flop frequently because you're not really set on what the future looks like. So to get slightly more specific, when I ask people what their vision is for their product, what I want to hear are 3 components. An opinion about what the future looks like, the technological trends that are enabling your idea. So why now? Why did this not happen in the 80s, the 90s, the noughties, whatever? Why now? And then, what's the change you actually want to make in the world? And there for me, they're the 3 components I look for in a vision. So the first piece is what does your future look like? So if you say to me that you're working on a new messaging app, well, what's changing in messaging? What does the future of messaging look like? Well, we have things like SMSs being destroyed by WhatsApp. Email has now become solely a note of record. It's no longer how most communication actually happens. Sure, emails are still sent, but they tend to be sent to summarize a conversation that happened in Slack or something. There's new opportunities and perpetual new opportunities in public or private or perishable or ephemeral or one-to-one video, picture. There's so many different ways messaging is blowing up. Similarly, commerce, we're seeing a lot of changes. On demand, anything is beating everything. So basically, if you can order a coffee and have it put in your hand on demand, if you can make that business work, it'll be a popular business, which is kind of sad for the future of humanity in some sense. But it is what we're buying. Same-day local delivery or subscription services are also taking over what commerce is. In marketing, we're seeing a shift away from mass marketing towards marketing that's both personal and personalized. It's more analytics-driven. It's less big brand. Billboards are dying a death. These are when I ask people what's changing, if you tell me you're building a project management app, I want to hear what's your opinion about what's changing and how projects are managed. Because if you don't have one of those, you certainly don't have an idea for a product. Second piece is what are the technological trends that you're betting on. So there's obviously numerous ones of these. We have the most obvious in our face one right now. Does this matter for your domain? Does this enable new use cases? If you're say a sports product or a fitness product, there's obvious repercussions by the fact that if this thing is even a quarter as successful as the iPhone, it's going to change absolutely everything. Then you've the ones who have yet to fully arrive, this idea of the connected home, the idea that your phone talks to your blender, who talks to your toaster, who talks to your television, and somehow that's a good thing. You also have wearables of a non-watch form as well. You've got things like Google Glass, which may or may not happen. On one hand, you could say it's the most revolutionary product we've ever seen. On the other hand, it's kind of like Segway, but for your face. So you can kind of come at it either way. The other interesting trend that I think everyone gets to piggyback off, and it does have a repercussion, is that the cost of doing everything, doing all sorts of business online is dramatically reducing over time. So in the early 2000s, if you were doing a startup, you're talking about like, raising 5, 10 million, and like a lot of that money would be burnt on like servers and hardware and system administrators and all of these things that were just kind of like, it didn't even matter what your product was. This was kind of the cost of entry. The cost of entry is now zero. It's like, it's effectively zero. You have tools like Heroku giving you entirely free hosting. You've got Amazon who give you like very affordable, scalable hosting. What this means is you get like teams like, say, the guys from WhatsApp. A team of 30 engineers build a product that destroys SMS and is sold for $23 billion. And that's like 30 people. That's like the first 4 rows here. Congrats. But like it is crazy. That's actually where we find ourselves today. Of course, when WhatsApp explodes, what you get is like all of the messaging apps. So now every single person out there has an idea for a messaging app. And these are all messaging apps, beautifully color-coded. And everyone's thinking they're going to be the $24 billion messaging app. But it is true that all of this is possible because of like the WhatsApp play, if you like, what makes it actually easy to scale and easy to work, and I say easy in quotes, but certainly affordable and viable, is a lot of it's backed by these trends of like reduced technological cost. So the last piece of a vision, so we've talked about the future of your domain, we've talked about the technological trends, and the last piece is just simply the personal one. So yes, maybe remote working is on the rise, and maybe it's, maybe wearables make it easier than ever to be in touch with your team, and like this is your ethos. I say, okay, and where do you fit in all that? What change are you trying to bring to this world? And the answer isn't I want to make $100 million or I want to make $10 million, because if you succeed, you might well make that money, and then what, right? Is that it? Are you done? Do you shut the servers down and go home? It's not about goals or targets or being like number ones or top tens or any of that sort of stuff. What it really is, it's a kind of a much more core personal question, but it is important. And if you talk to like credible investors, they'll really want to know what it is that drives you. Because if it's just, I want to be in a startup, well, you'll achieve that when you sign your incorporation docs. And if it's just, I want to make a few $1 million, well, once you make that, will you still have the drive to keep going? It's really like, how much do you care about what it is you're trying to do? Like, the guys from Heroku, their entire vision was, we just want to let app developers spend time on code, not on hosting. GitHub wanted to help people write better code faster, and that's what drove them to start GitHub, and that's the reason why GitHub is still here today. At Intercom, we want to make internet business personal. Stripe want to increase the GDP of the internet. Instacart want to be the best way for anyone to shop for groceries ever. Uber want to make transportation as reliable as running water. And the reason I share these is just, it's an important thing to have, because having a great mission, it helps you hire, it helps you understand, it helps your team make good, smart local decisions, but they have to know what the hell it is you're trying to do. Because if their goal is like make 5 million in ARR by 2017, that's not that inspiring, They could go work somewhere where they've already hit that mission. Once you've identified your product vision, the next piece, and this is where where like evolving your product is important, is building the smallest, simplest product. It reminds me of that Einstein quote: "Everything should be as simple as possible, but no simpler." So here is something we're all familiar with: a scalpel. A scalpel is easy to market and explain, and it's easy to adopt. It does one thing well. It's easy to test if it does that thing well. If I take a scalpel and just gently rub it down your arm, you'll work out. We can both establish pretty quickly if it does what we hoped it would do. The opposite of a scalpel to me is it's something more akin to like a Swiss Army knife, right? It's hard to market. It's hard to explain. It does pretty much nothing very well. It takes a long time to build. It's hard to evaluate if it's any good at what it does. But we kind of have some obvious ideas. Like if I said to my buddy, hey, I have to cut down a tree in my front lawn, could you come over and bring your saw? And he brings this over, I'll be like, that's not what I was hoping for. If you're hosting a classy dinner party and someone says, hey, pass the wine opener, you're like, got it. You start to realize what it is a collection of tangentially useful things whose only real value comes from the fact that they're all smashed together, right? It's a one-size-fits-none device. Now, that's fine in a world where like your entire goal has to be fits in a pocket, or I'm going on a camping trip, so I don't need the best of everything, I just need something. Software doesn't really play out that way. Software, we tend to evolve towards scalpels. So there's a great principle in systems design that speaks to this, which is a complex system that works invariably has evolved from a simple system that worked. A complex system that you design from scratch to be complex will never work. And it can't ever be made to work either. You have to start simple. Even if you want to build a bloated piece of shit, you have to start simple. It's the only way you get there. So, what does that mean? Well, what that means is your first product or your first feature releases should always be a solution to a real problem that exists today, not a hypothetical, not something where it's like, well, wouldn't it be cool if? No, it wouldn't most of the time. It should be easy to build, test, and refine. You should know what it is you're trying to do, and you should be able to measure if it does the job you want it to do. It should be easy to explain to a business. Now, that's if you're working in a B2B space. Obviously, easy to explain to a consumer. The most sort of simplest difference between B2B and B2C is that one of them you're looking for a business to depend or rely on your product, and that's why they'll pay you money. And with B2C, you're looking for people to be addicted or attracted to your product, and that's why they'll keep launching it. And lastly, it should be easy to adopt. It should be easy to pick up. It shouldn't be the sort of thing where we have to throw away all our existing software just to start using your piece. So it should fit in nicely into the world as it exists today. Now, there's a difference between making a simple product and making a product simple. That sounds like it's a typo, but it's not. If you're making a simple product, it's about the actual defining the product to be simple. And then there's a difference between that and simplifying it, which is when you're trying to reduce it to be the most simple, the smallest valuable piece possible. When you're making a simple product, you decide where it starts and where it stops in a workflow. Because products only ever capture one subset of a workflow. You might say, I do time tracking software, and I say, okay, cool. I can understand you do time tracking software. But you don't do it all the way to the point where the person gets a check written out for them and they go cash it into the bank and then go and spend that money on groceries. You obviously only capture a subset of this piece. It's the subset that you capture is what matters. So if we take a simple problem like say, here's Jenny and Jenny has to pay her team. And in her world, success is when everyone's paid. So how does she get from A to B? Well, it turns out there's a lot of things you have to do to actually pay your team in a consultancy, and this is obviously a fictitious use case. But you obviously check the bank, review the projects, build the clients, check the timesheets, verify the rates, drop the pay slips, issue the transfers, and then make the payments. And it's really, really tempting to think, all right, well, that's it. A to Z, that's what we need to build, and we'll be home and hosed, and everyone's going to be happy. Wonderful. It doesn't actually work that way. You have to be clever about where you start. You want to start at the first point in that workflow where you can add new value. And by new value, I mean do it better than it's currently being done. Because otherwise you're asking them to change behavior with no additional benefit whatsoever. And we've all had that sort of email of aren't you bored with how you upload your slides? And I'm like, no. End of sales pitch, right? You have to be able to add new value. I'm not bored with how I do that, right? That's not new value. Plan how to transition from the previous steps seamlessly. So I don't know, has anyone heard of TripIt? TripIt is a cool travel planning thing. One of the things I love about TripIt, what their transition step is, so what they do is they map out all your holiday plans and they tell you where you're going and your airports and flight codes and all that. But all they do is they just import receipts from your email. You never have to enter a single thing. They transition from the previous steps seamlessly because they just say, well, we know you have all this in your email, connect us to your email and we'll take it from there. It's a real smooth way to transition. And where should you stop in the workflow? Well, if the next step is done by a market leader, so let's say you're doing a date planning app, and at some point you know that the person's likely to go and check for a review of the movie to see if it's good before they book tickets. Well, you don't necessarily want to go and take on IMDb. You're not going to win that fight. Pick your battles, smartly, I guess. Discretion is often the better part of valor. If the next step is done in hundreds of different ways by hundreds of different types of customers, that's usually a good indication you should not enter it. A classic example of this is payroll tax. 180 different countries in the world, roughly 180 different ways to do payroll tax. In fact, in some countries, there's about 150 different ways within the same state. So what that means is you have to this behavior forks, and you have to map onto every single version of it. So that's another good indication. You just back away. You can stop your product there. Or lastly, if it's something you just can't innovate on at all. So if the next step is they make a phone call, sure, you could go and build VoIP, but to what end? You're going to get nowhere. So what this looks like, to play it out as an example, is if we take this workflow here, which is a version of the problem that Jenny had earlier, It's tempting as a startup, especially like, you've got your team and you're like, oh, we're going to build so much kick-ass software, and you already in your head you can picture the beautiful UI you're going to design for all of this, because you think this is one product, but it's not one product. It's more like 3 products. And you pick your product, and then when you have your product, you say, well, how can I transition into this step as easily as possible? And then also, to fit into their workflow as it exists today, how can I set them up so that they can do the next step easy as well? And when we talk about simple products, that's what we mean. We mean finding the smallest subset that we can definitely address. I kind of call this the Scopylocks principle, in that no scope too big because no one will ever adopt your product. No scope too small because you'll be dismissed as being a feature, not a product, or not worth installing, or whatever. You want to find a product that's just right. Another interesting thing I often tell people about when they're building out their product is it's kind of what we call the cupcake principle. I borrowed it from Brandon Scherer of Adaptive Path. But key point of the cupcake principle is, let's say you're getting married. Congratulations. You want to build a wedding cake. There's lots of different ways to do this. In one world, you could build a base, and you're happy with your base. You're like, all right, base is done. Now we'll go and make some filling. And lastly, we'll put on some icing. And then lo and behold, you're due to get married tomorrow, and you put the whole thing together, you taste it, and it tastes like shit. And you're disappointed. And the reason it tastes terrible is because you never actually realized that you don't like chocolate and carrot and vinegar as a cake flavor. Or you realized that your oven doesn't work, so you had to microwave it. And that didn't work. Or any of these numerous things can go wrong. Another way to arrive at this same cake is to start with something simpler. You start with a cupcake. And at this point, when you're eating this chocolate, carrot, and vinegar creation, you're like, no thanks. So you've learned, and the best part is, it's still 79 days until your wedding. And you make the cake, and then you're like, hey, you know what? The oven doesn't cook fast enough. We need a new oven. And then lastly, when you solve all these problems, then you get married with a decent wedding cake. And I encourage people to always think about that when they're working on any product or even any process in work. Like, what's the smallest thing that will verify all of the biggest things we're likely to bump into? Like, if we're going to screw up, let's do it way the hell in advance. Let's not do it on the day. So another piece is, when we've actually shipped our cupcake and it's working well and we know what our vision is, all things going to plan, you will hit this mythical beast called traction. And traction looks something like this. You get more users over time. It's awesome. Of course, you don't just get more users over time. You get more vision over time. You get more competitors over time. You get more feature requests. You grow a board. You add a team. You get more press coverage. And all of these things are uniquely wonderful, and they're the sort of things you dream about when you're growing up, except for the darker side of it is this. They all feed into things that we now need to add to our product. And that can be troublesome, because before it was just you and your co-founders and your idea for your product, but now it's you, your co-founders, your competitors, your customers, your advisors, your mentors, your investors, your product team, your press, what Forrester says is coming next, they're always good for a laugh too, and what our biggest customers want to pay more for. And all of this is all shit you need to build now. And you feel this constant pressure, and you probably have a whiteboard in the office, and you just keep perpetually adding things to it as all of this stuff just has to happen or we are screwed. And if you build it all, you won't end up in this happy place that you want to be. If you build it all, you'll create this, right? You'll run straight headfirst into this. Now the thing is, for all its glamour, for all the mockery I make of it, it is quite a glamorous device. It's got Swiss design. You probably don't have Swiss design. You're going to build a file matrix, right? No one ever says, hey, guys, new idea, let's build a bloated piece of shit. And I was like, ooh, shrewd, Des. Didn't see where you came in with that one. Like, that's not how these conversations go. You get there one small, weak decision at a time. One, what harm could it do at a time is how you get here. It's never on the roadmap to like, oh yeah, and make the UI ugly. The other cost you pay here is like this idea of, you're probably familiar with the story of the blind man and the elephant, but like, different people will talk about your product as if it does different things. So in the story of the blind man and the elephant, depending on what part of the elephant you're feeling, you'll think it's a different thing. You'll think it's a rhino, or it's a wall, or it's a rope, or it's a tree, or a snake, or whatever. Your product will have this exact problem. Some people will tell you you're a project management tool. Some people will tell you you're a time tracker. Some people will be like, no, that's my invoicing tool. No, guys, that's purely where I just update clients and it connects to Slack. And that makes your word of mouth suck, because no one can actually explain what your product does. It damages your word of mouth, which damages probably, like in your early days, one of your best growth channels, because everyone describes your product as different things. It actually sounds like 10 different products because it kind of is. Now, it's funny to talk about Swiss Army knives and even the file matrix and elephants, but what does feature creep actually look like? Well, the tired cliches aren't actually useful to describe this. So the tired cliches are things like, the Microsoft Word screenshot. Every UX designer worth their salt has had at least one 5-minute section of a presentation where they get to rip on Microsoft Word, kind of somehow ignoring the fact that it's the second most commercially successful piece of software of all time. But hey, look at those toolbars, and then the other example is obviously the Homer Simpson car. But it's actually neither of these things. They actually don't help us understand what bloat looks like. One thing I think that's useful that helps us understand this is to kind of involve a little bit of data and a little bit of perspective on what we're talking about. Good product managers can answer questions like this. Plot all of your main features on this axis. How many people use it, and how often do they use it? Very simple question, but it gets to the core of what bloat is about. Because if you take a project management tool, so for example, an Asana or a Basecamp or something like that, what you'll see is that all of the people all of the time are posting messages and replies and creating projects and adding tasks and that sort of stuff. And then maybe you have a couple of rogue features here, like say SMS alert, where probably never made sense. No one's really using it. You probably added it and didn't really think about it. A good way to think about these features is something like this, right? The core of your product, where you can add most value, where you currently deliver most value, where you should focus most of your efforts on, is high and to the right. It is what everyone's using all the time. If you are Instagram, this is your take photo, your filter, your upload, your like. If you are Facebook, it could be your status update or your video player or your photo uploader. But every product has this, and you're probably not spending enough time making it better. I often joke with people no shit, but if you put a little bit of time making login faster, all of your customers benefit. It's a weird one, but that's a very, what's the first page they land on right after they log in? That page, if you can do improvements there, that's going to be useful. Or you can spend time working on some archaic corner of the app that no one ever sees. But if you have stuff here, this is danger, because what it means is you have a small amount of people depending on a specific feature, and most of your user base don't use it at all. So that means you're now working on something that's going to be appreciated by very, very, very few people, which means you can't justify the investment in it. So you're going to piss some people off, basically. What does a well-rounded product look like? So if we know what scope or what feature creep is like, here's a simple way to think about it. What percentage of people are using these features? So just taking the frequency out for a second. This is often where you start. When you launch and you get some sort of traction, it's usually because you have a pretty small product and people use the stuff you built and they like it. So unfortunately, success can be kind of a lousy teacher, because you get this idea that oh my God, I actually probably am a genius. I didn't realize this before, but everything I just shipped, everyone's using. I should ship some more stuff. So you fire up Photoshop, and you're like, oh, I'm going to add some features. And in your head, this is all runaway success. You're adding features, and everyone's loving them. And people are like, you're this close to being on the cover of Forbes magazine as the next product design guru. And then the one sad part about software is reality always gets to bat last. So you ship it, and then what actually happens is something more like this. It turns out you didn't actually extend your product in the way you hoped you would. When you were playing around in Photoshop thinking you're a genius, maybe you weren't so much. And even this is slightly optimistic, because the wider your product gets, the more stuff you add that people don't care about, the worse your core product offering is, because it's just now weighed under with all of this new junk you've added. So a more likely outcome is something more like this. And if you've ever had the feeling, hey, that product started out and was pretty cool, but man, it got slow, buggy, and bloated over time, that's what happened. unused features slow you down. They slow your development team down. They confuse your users. They mess up your marketing. They pile up on top of each other. Good product managers know to remove them, but great product managers don't actually add them in the first place. And in that regard, I'm reminded of a quote by Steve Jobs, who said, and there's no audio, when you think about focus, he's talking about like why he killed OpenDoc, and he said, well, focus, people say it's about saying yes, as in yes, we're going to focus on that. But his point is, focus is about what you don't put in your product. You know your focus when you literally have a list of things that we're never, ever going to add to this thing. And that's a really, really strong place to be in. When customers ask you for a feature request and you say, I understand, I can totally see why that makes sense in your workflow. Here's a few other products that will meet that, because we are not going to add it. It sounds scary because you're thinking, oh my God, I'm limiting my potential market size. That's all okay. It just means we've got focus. Oh, yeah. Another interesting thing is how customers value a hypothetical feature. So one reason you'll often be given as to why we should build something is that, well, we've talked to customers and they really like it. They think it's going to be awesome. And you're like, oh, let's see how that plays out. So you ask them, hey, would you like a new calendar feature in your tool? And they're like, yeah, sure we would. And you're like, okay, great news. We just launched a new calendar feature. And they're like, oh, cool. And you're like, oh, fine. Well, if you don't like it, we can get rid of it. Now all of a sudden they have this like manic sort of appreciation for something that they never touched before because they feel like you're taking cookies back off them, you know? So it's actually easier to not do this in the first place. I really like this photo here of like, it makes the point for me that a failure to cull features leaves you to be one of these products that people just have to take all the shit out of just so that they can use the bit that actually makes sense to them. Like when I first saw this, I thought it was funny right up until the bit where I decided actually I'm going to do this to my remote control at home because it's really annoying. So like, I say all this to make a sort of a single point, which is like that great products are like cohesive, they're interconnected. They don't include these random extra tabs in the far corner where it's like, oh, you can also manage your expenses over here. And they're like, that made no sense. Why the hell did you add that? Everything should be connected together. It should have like a singular focus. It should match your vision. And the last piece I just want to talk about is you have to always fight for usage. No matter how good you are, no matter how big your brand is, no matter how popular your company is, I guarantee you there are teams in Apple Music right now sweating, agonizing over the fact that people aren't using playlists and aren't using share and aren't using all these new features they built. Everyone has to fight for usage. It's not something that gets bestowed to you by the product gods. What this means, to enable yourself to fight for usage, you must be diligent with your roadmap. Consistent and diligent. Roadmaps are a fight. They're probably the number one biggest thing that people beat each other up and work over. Because everyone has their own thing that they definitely want on the roadmap. And if you tell them, hey, you know that cool idea you had where you could click this thing and it would automatically send the map link to your phone? They're like, yeah. You're like, cool, we're not doing that. And like, that's exactly how you piss people off. But it's unfortunately what has to happen. So, like as I said, it's important to be able to answer this. When you're looking at your roadmap, you'll find there should only be 4 types of work in your roadmap. 4. You're either improving a feature, and if you're trying to improve a feature, you have to check yourself and say, well, do customers value it more now after we shipped all this code or not? Or you're getting more people to use a feature, in which case the percentage of people who are adopting that feature should be higher. Or you're getting people to use it more, in which case the frequency of usage should be higher. Or lastly, and this should be the exception as you mature, you're building a new feature to support a new workflow, in which case you should see either an increase in revenue or an increase in customers, or both. Otherwise, you're just adding shit to your product for no reason. So to go through these, there's a balance between the quality of a feature, how important it is, how satisfied your customers are, and how often they use it. All of these things are intertwined. A feature can be really, really good, but no one ever uses it, so it doesn't matter. Or it can be really, really important, and if it's in any way weak, you need to fix it, unless people don't use it. So the way I think about this is that you have quality. How well executed is it? Important. How important in the workflow is it, like, for making this whole, for making your product complete? how satisfied are users with it, and how often do they use it? And all of these things can add up and give you different arguments as to why you need to work on something. Anthony Ulwick's framework is pretty interesting here. He measures what he calls like the opportunity index. He says the opportunity on any given feature is basically how important it is plus the difference between how important it is and how satisfied people are with it. It's kind of pseudo-mathematical. What I like about it personally is it gives you an interesting way to think about it. If something's really important, it's always worth working on. If something is really sucks and no one cares about it, leave it be. It's okay if no one cares. But if people care about it even a little bit and it's really bad, that's where the opportunity for your work is. One thing is like when you apply any of these frameworks, either like the most important features and most frequently used features ever, the temptation is to pop out a list at the end of it all. And I can only say just be careful how you use lists in roadmaps, because lists tend to rob you of a degree of rigor that you would otherwise get. The best way I can explain this, and this is a point, it's from a partner at Google Ventures who makes this point. It's very easy to come up with a list and say, this is what we need to work on. And over here, we have our team. So, okay, what we'll do is we'll just assign the team to work on the things and we'll be happy. And that's a very rational way to look at this until you realize, well, hang on a second. Where do our users care? What's the biggest problem for them? The example used by the guy at Google was, he said, Google Docs. They had a list just like this, and they delegated work just like this. What they failed to realize was that literally everyone who used Google only cared about the fact that their formatting didn't work. No one gave a shit about table of contents or dynamic injection of images or any other stuff that they were working on. They only cared about formatting. They actually did a funny experiment where they said, here, we're going to give you 100 fictitious dollars, and you each get to spend money where you think we should improve it. And two different people both put their fictitious $100 into the formatting jar, opened their wallet, took out another $100 of real money and put that into the jar too. That's how broken their feature was. I say all this just to make the point that when you order things in a list, you can lose the severity. If you know what the severity is, you might actually think about doing things slightly differently. I know it seems like a mute point or like an obvious point, but like, believe me, I guarantee you a lot of you are doing this whether you know it or not within your org today. So, we talked about making a feature better. The other ways you can improve a feature, so let's say this one here, most of the people use it kind of often. Well, we can trigger more usage, so we can get people to use it more. What you're looking for here is how do we make this habitual? How do we trigger people to use it? How do we reward its usage? How do we make the default case to drive usage? How can it be used in more contexts? Maybe it can be used on a watch, on a phone. Maybe it can be used in a Slack channel, through a bot. How can it be used in more ways? What other uses kind of have? These are all ways that you will increase how often a feature is used. And secondly, how do we get people to use it more? What's stopping people from using it? So what you want to do here is talk to the non-adopters and work out what's going wrong. Understand the real why behind a feature. I don't need it. Why? Well, I don't get any value out of it. Why? Well, because I can't present it in my meetings. Why? Well, because I sent around a doc and present a PowerPoint file and this doesn't fit in. And why is that a problem? Well, the data's hidden behind all the UI controls, so I can't show this screenshot and it looks terrible. And you're like, ah, right. So you want a print view or you want a display view. And now we realize that it's not that they don't need it, it's just that they can't use it. And that's what the barrier to adoption here is. Of course, you don't just stop at one person, you talk to lots of people, and you find lots of barriers to adoption. No one's using reports. Why? The UI is too confusing. Why? Because they don't understand merge. Why? And you'll find reasons that are stopping people from using your product. Once you find the reasons, it's simply a matter of, like, again, ranking and resolving. And again, do not lose the severity here. But you can then basically tackle these. And sometimes there's a weird thing here, but like sometimes you don't have to ship new code to solve this. You just need to like change labels or start conversations. Like if someone says they can't understand the interface for report generation, maybe a better thing to do is like when the first time they get there, show them a video. That way you don't have to change your product at all, but it's an easier thing to do. If someone does not know how to share, maybe start a conversation with them on the share page and say, just FYI, if you ever need to do this, here's how it works. Starting conversations is a great way to solve problems, or at least verify what the confusion is before you go and ship a load of code and take a load more risks. And lastly, the fourth type of work is new features. So the thing about new features is that they usually flop. It's a sad reality. People are usually disappointed. They put 2 or 3 months of work in, put it on their blog, mail all their customers, and no one uses it, and that's the end of that. And there's a few different reasons, but one of them is definitely availability. I love this quote from Microsoft Word, who said, and they were kind of boasting about this, in a recent survey we asked features what they wanted from new versions of Office. More than 90% of what they wanted was already in Office. For some reason they were proud of this. Like, this is their claim of, like, it looks like we really know the needs of our users. And it's like, yeah, so you obviously got something else wrong here, right? This is actually why they changed Office around to use the ribbon toolbar, because they wanted to expose more of the functionality, because it turns out most people wanted things that were already there, but they were like 9 clicks deep in a menu tree. Another thing you have to do, so along with discoverability, which you have to address, make sure people can actually find the stuff you build, is sell what the feature lets the user do, not what it is. So many features are sold based on the ingredients that they are composed of, as opposed to the capability that they actually let the user now do. Capability always beats ingredients. So like what it is versus what it does versus what you can do now. What you can do now is what users care about. They don't particularly care about the fact that you rewrote something in an Objective-C or Swift or whatever. It's like, what can I do now because you did that? Announce it in context where they're likely to use it. So if they're in your app, tell them about the feature in your app when they're in there. Just like, a waiter advertises the specials when you're in the restaurant, he doesn't send you emails about tonight's specials. Have a plan for how next week's customers will hear about it. So one thing we always get wrong is we do a big marketing splash for something we ship, and that works. And then in a week's time, someone new customer, they didn't get the email because they weren't on the mailing list. They haven't heard about it yet. So how are they going to find out about this feature that you worked on? Have a plan for that too. And lastly, follow up for users to see what they like. But more importantly, follow up with non-users right after you ship to work out what's stopping you from adopting this. This is what you have to do. You always have to fight for usage. You do not get it for free. Now, here's the four types of work we talked about that you'll have in your roadmap. Over time, your priorities will shift. For example, before you have a product, you're mostly working on new features because you don't have any features. Later on, you might be looking for people to use those features. Or later on, you might be then you have people using it, and they're all happily using it, and you're looking for ways to improve it. But you will always have this balance. What's really important for you to know is that what is the balance, and is it a deliberate choice, or is it are we just forever fighting to ship new shit? Because shipping new stuff is so much more superficially rewarding. You get marketing splashes and TechCrunch write-ups and all that sort of stuff, but it's not what gets you a great product. So there are my 4 points. It's all about your vision. Start simple. Keep it focused, and fight for usage. If you found the presentation useful and you'd like the slides, you can just drop me a mail. It's des-slides@Intercom. I'm Des TRAYNOR from Intercom. It's more links there. I didn't really talk about Intercom in the presentation because I don't do that. I hope this was useful to you all. Thanks so much.